Good morning. I declare open the public briefing for the committee's examination of the Transport Legislation Taxi Service Amendment Bill for 2015. Thank you for your attendance here today. I'm Jim Pearce, the member for Moranny and chair of the committee. Other committee members include Mr Michael Hart down here as deputy chair and member for Burleigh, Mr Glenn Butcher, member for Gladstone, Mrs Brittany Lauger, member for Keppel, Mr Lachlan Miller right down the very end there, member for Gregory, and Mr Shane Kenneth, the member for Dalrymple. Those here today should note that these proceedings are being broadcast to the web, and media might also be present. So it is possible that you might be filmed or photographed. The briefing is also being transcribed by Hansard. This briefing is a formal committee proceeding, and as such you should be guided by Schedule 8 of the Standing Orders, a copy of which has been provided. The aim of the briefing today is for the committee to gather preliminary information in relation to the bill, and I now welcome representatives from the Department of Transport and Main Roads, and for the record, could departmental officers please state their names and positions.
I'll start off. My name is Nola Cerretti. I'm Acting Director of Taxi and Limousine Regulations.
Thanks, Nola.
And my name is Nigel Ellis, of course, Acting Executive Director, Transport Access and Use.
Lee Baker, Acting Manager of Taxi and Limousine Services within Translink Division.
And Scott Notley, Acting Director of Industry Accreditation and Authorisation.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Would you like to make a early opening statement?
No, we just decided we'll answer any questions you pose.
So you don't have a statement to sort of warm us up or nothing like that? Okay. Well, is there anything that you sort of like to that's happening that you'd like to just tell us about in the last couple of weeks?
Well, you obviously have heard that there's the new review,
yes,
personal transport review. So that started. That was announced by the Deputy Premier on Wednesday the 7th, and Mr Jim Varghese is being identified as the chair for that, and that will be delivered. The outcomes from that review will be delivered in August 2016. Apart from that, there's the usual, situation between Uber operating illegally in the marketplace and the taxi licence owners having issue with that. So that just continues.
All right, well, let's get started with the questions. You might be able to explain to us how the taxi industry is regulated in Queensland?
Can I throw it
to
Lee?
Just go over.
There are a number of things that we regulate the industry by, most effectively a taxi licence regime. So there are 3,261 taxi licences in Queensland, each having a taxi licence. The drivers and the operators need to be accredited for that, so those operators or owners who indeed operate those taxi service licences have to hold OA, operator accreditation, and those drivers that drive for those operators have to hold DA, taxi DA, driver authorisation. We have a regime of contracts with booking companies, in essence who are call centres, the yellows and black and whites of this world, and those contract provisions require performance under minimum service levels and other key reporting functions under the contracts about how they operate their services. We have market entry restrictions that are in place that look at new entrants into the taxi market in terms of having to meet particular thresholds for triggering the requirement of a taxi contract. There are other manners of regulation in terms of provisions of security cameras, calibrations, how taxi meters are to be calibrated, fares, maximum fares, transport industry levies for provisions and funding for secure ranks. There's a whole myriad of things we regulate the industry by.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll put two questions into one here. Is it only Uber that is providing unlicensed taxi services? And is there any truth in what I was told by a taxi driver the other day, that there was a concert on in town at the weekend and a lot of the Uber drivers were actually taking people home for nothing as a means of introducing them to the service. You may not know, but I can see the look on your face.
I always have that look.
You always have the concert.
My normal look.
Did you get Uber? Well, that's what I was told, and also that when people actually get into a car that's a part of the Uber group, that they get a $45 worth of free travel to start off with. Do you think there's any truth in that? Anyone?
I don't have any knowledge about that, but information comes to us very regularly on a day-to-day basis from the industry or industry participants that provide us those details, but I don't have any...
You haven't heard anything like that?
Much about that, no.
Certainly I've heard those stories from kids that I know that have received a little voucher for their first time use.
Okay.
I've also heard about businesses that are getting booklets of vouchers, so that, you know, if you're running a business and you used to use taxis, but this is all hearsay, that they give you a book of free coupons that you can use with Uber drivers. So there is some sort of, they're very good at marketing and social media.
Yeah, it seemed to be, yeah. All right, Michael.
Yes, 3,621, was that the figure you used?
3,261.
Dyslexic, obviously. If I was starting a taxi service and I wanted to buy a licence, how much would it cost me?
You can do it either of two ways. The licence transfer on market, so you go and buy from someone who wants to sell their licence, or we don't actually sell licences. We offer licences to public tender or via public tender to the market.
Right.
And
what are they average? What sort of price range do they average?
In Brisbane,
yeah.
The last time I looked, it was around the 500,000 mark, 480 to 500,000 for a conventional unconditional licence.
So is it safe to say then that 3,261 times $500,000 basically would be the value of the licensing?
I would say that's not an accurate calculation. There are licences in other parts of Queensland, regional Queensland, rural Queensland, where licence values are nowhere near that amount of money.
Can you put a value then on what the licences would be worth?
I think we have a figure, and this may not be accurate. I don't know. I haven't done the calculation, but there was a $1.4 billion figure.
Right.
Being
$1.4 billion figure.
We could clarify that for you.
Yeah, that'd be good. Now, you said before that Uber was illegal. Why is it illegal?
They're operating outside of the regulation, so they don't follow any of the. They don't follow the fare structure in the regulation. They don't have cameras. They don't have meters. Can you help me out with this one too? I mean, I think that covers. They're actually not following the and the costs of operating. We also say that a taxi should be affiliated with a taxi booking company, which has a cost as well.
But does that make it illegal? If they're not affiliated?
Well, if they're not following the regulations set down by Queensland, it's illegal, and that's what they're not doing. They don't have a fare structure that's agreed to. They don't.
They don't hold taxi licences.
They don't hold taxi licences.
It's illegal?
Yes.
Right.
If they're providing a taxi service, they need to hold a taxi licence.
So our legislation requires that they classify or define it as demand responsive, and the only public passenger service can operate a demand responsive service is a taxi.
Right. So as far as the government's concerned, Uber is illegal.
Yes.
So what's the government doing about it?
Well, that's currently why the review's been called, to have a look at the taxi industry and see how it can move forward to either include or exclude.
Okay, so that doesn't answer my question. What is the government presently doing about Uber operating illegally?
There is a compliance process currently. I might defer to Nigel around the compliance issues that are being done.
Well, it's been well publicised, Mr. Hart, that there is a compliance program on operation, and a number of tickets, of course, have been issued. So that program's ongoing, but of course that doesn't actually take you towards the future state or the future regulatory state, because we've also got a taxi strategic plan that runs out this year and is up for review.
Right.
So
if something's illegal in Queensland, do we not take action? We wait and review the situation. Is that what we do?
No, offences have been issued against a range of drivers, and to date, 1,286 infringements, have been issued and paid. So, infringement program has been in operation. Transport inspectors are running a range of operations.
Right. And how many of those fines have been paid?
I've got a dollar figure, but
Yes.
I don't have the number. There's
I have the number.
have you?
Yeah,
The paid?
1,286 infringements have been paid totaling
And do we
$1.468 million.
do we know who's paid that bill? Has that been the individuals, or has Uber paid it, or whoever owns Uber paid it?
Again, there's
I might answer that. I think what we believe is that the drivers are paying the fines and Uber are reimbursing the drivers.
Have any of the infringements been challenged?
yes.
Yes.
There's currently 189 being challenged and going through the prosecution's area within
They're in
transport.
court.
No, not yet. They're still doing some. The prosecution's team are currently working up the briefs to go to court. So nothing's
Is the
actually
government
gone.
taking anybody to court over this?
Not yet. What's happened in the past and in other jurisdictions, so the prosecution team here has learnt from other jurisdictions, is that Uber's very good at challenging these cases when they go to court. So they'll challenge the authority of the transport inspector to have made the infringement notice. They'll challenge all aspects of the case. So unless everything's got T's crossed and I's dotted, it gets thrown out and gets delayed. So our prosecutions team are endeavouring to ensure that everything's right before they go to court. So they haven't taken anything to court yet.
How long ago did this all start?
We provided Uber with a cease and desist order in May 2014. So that's when it started.
So it's been
And they
over a
decided
year.
to just keep operating.
It's been over a year then,
Yes.
and nobody's been taken to court yet.
No.
Could I ask a question? It is illegal for someone to use their vehicle as a carriage service without a taxi licence. Is that right? So it's illegal if someone is driving unlicensed. They don't
Yes.
have a licence. They get fined, and if they don't pay the fine, they go to court. Uber have been operating since 2014, and it seems to me that are we playing catch up here? Are we not on top of this? I mean, this is.
Look, Uber are they're a very good technology organisation. We've had overt.
Breaking the law.
I know.
They're breaking the law.
We did a whole lot of overt compliance. There's also what they call, you have to have reasonable suspicion. As the passenger transport inspectors, they can't just randomly stop. Say you were picking up your daughter or son at South Bank, so you were checking your phone as you were pulling into a car park and they're checking their phone. You can't automatically assume that that's an Uber driver, so transport inspectors can't automatically assume that people are operating as an Uber driver. They have to have what they call reasonable suspicion in a legal sense, and that's determined whether or not people in the community would consider that to be reasonable.
But can't you take Uber to court? Uber, the company, they're breaking the law if they're operating in Queensland. Instead of going after individuals, should you also be looking at the company itself and taking it to court?
And I'm not sure if anyone else can answer this, but I'm pretty sure, but I will check on this, that we don't. Uber isn't, the company itself isn't operating illegally. It's when the drivers drive their cars and pick up passengers that is operating illegally. So the company themselves, it seems. But can I take that on? I can give you some information because that really comes from our legal people.
Sure.
I can expand on that a little bit, and I'm not a solicitor, but the legal advice I think we had initially was that Uber, the app, aren't acting as a booking service under our legislation. I must admit my knowledge of the app is very, very limited, but I believe taxis aren't dispatched to individuals. The people look at the app and accept a taxi or pick a taxi on the app. By definition, that's not dispatching a taxi.
So you had any advice then to see whether making it illegal under legislation would fix this problem?
We haven't, I don't think, but I'm not sure whether you know that.
Come back to us about that.
What we have to a certain degree is we've got, and this has been put out in the public sense, I think, by the forum by the government today, is we've got legislation from a number of decades ago that's been written around obligations of parties with offences it doesn't quite apply to a modern day approach with modern technology used. The offences are wrapped around the action of providing a taxi service without a licence, providing a limo service without a licence, providing an operation without without driver authorisation. So the offences and at the operator level are not as written 2 or 3 decades ago, or 1994 or 5, are not as didn't foresee these sort of arrangements.
Could you take us through an example how you would catch an Uber driver? I mean, what would be the process, just in a layman's terms?
Sure, and I won't go too far in terms of detail here because it exposes probably a compliance strategy that we've been applying to date. But simply a strategy they may have used in the past would involve simply a transport inspector engaging an Uber a vehicle as a customer, ordering one, the vehicle arrives, you have a certain amount of evidence train put into effect, and you can meet the evidence and the legal threshold to take a matter to court. So that's a common strategy that's been applied to date.
So you just have, the Hollywood compliance officers hit the app.
That's one
bang,
strategy, yes.
And then turns up and there you go. There's
one
your fine.
Another one is they could see it operating on the street and intervene. No?
That's very difficult, though. Like I said before, you can't just walk up to somebody who's in their car and suggest that they're providing an Uber service. That's the legal advice we've been given. Those covert actions of booking an Uber driver have actually been hampered recently by Uber themselves. They now can, with their technology, recognise not only the SIM card but the handset that's ordered an Uber car that's engaged in a PIN being provided to the driver. So they've then disabled that phone and that SIM card to actually connect with their app in the future. So we've gone through hundreds of phones trying to replace them to do catch the next driver in doing the wrong thing. They've also now changed their customer application process. So what used to happen in the past would we would buy Visa cards, where you can buy them as gift cards. So you'd use those Visa cards that aren't actually allocated to a person, and you'd go on and you would just start booking your Uber drive. Now they want all your personal details before you can actually become a customer or a member of Uber. We've checked apparently with the legal people, and the transport inspectors aren't able to use a false name. They have to, in their line of their duty, provide accurate information. So they aren't willing to provide their personal data to actually do the covert investigations any longer. So we have been thwarted in our compliance processes.
Saying there's no more fines being issued?
No, only if we can do them overtly, which is still difficult, like I said.
So how many fines have been issued the last 6 months and the last month?
I can't tell you the last 6 months. I can get you that information. I haven't got it with me, so I can get that on notice.
Just in regards to the Transport Department, obviously there appears to be a certain amount of frustration coming from yourselves as well. Do you feel that they're like a pest to the transport industry?
I wouldn't put it like that. I don't think it's fair for us to describe them, and I don't think personally we may associate them in such an insect term. But, look, there is, as Nola points out, there are challenges because we've done certain strategies to date, and one is a type of operation she's described, and they've adapted to it. So we're having to adapt and move with our strategies moving forward. What it means is sometimes you can have a compliance strategy which is very effective for high volumes, but you're left with other strategies that might not produce as much high volume moving into the future. but so we're having to adapt our approach moving forward. But the technology and how they've responded to us, and in terms of signing on to be an Uber customer, is just how they've adapted to work with us to just be smarter with their entry and their enrolment procedures for a customer.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yep. No. Just in regards to the compliance, can you confirm that has Uber blocked compliance officers recently from conducting compliance and enforcement work by blocking their telephones?
That's what I just, yeah. Definitely.
Just in regard to this review, obviously it's going to take until August, and there's a lot of frustration out there. And just talking to yourselves right now, there's a lot of information that you have available. Would you probably put the advice to the Minister that, hey, this review and the frustration that we see out there needs to be resolved really quickly rather than take up until August?
Well, we advised the Deputy Premier prior to the review. We put briefings up, and this was the decision to move forward. So we gave them, the government of the day, all the information.
So it's a policy decision of the government to take a year to...
Well, that's been the decision by the Deputy Premier.
Can I just clarify, was there any consultation with the Taxi Council and Uber around the timeframes of the review?
Personally, I don't think there was. I think this was just a departmental briefing and then a decision by the Deputy Premier.
My understanding was that Uber and the Taxi Council were consulted. The Taxi Council wanted 2 years for the review to go for, and Uber wanted 10 months, or maybe a year. Uber wanted 2 months. Is that right? Yeah. So, and
I have no
10
knowledge
months
of that. Sorry.
Okay.
There will always be debate over the size of the length of the review and whether it's sufficient or too long. I think the government is on record at saying that they're taking till August, giving it reasonable time to do the job properly. It's a job with some history and some complexity, and it's an important role. So they're taking time to actually get it right and trying to get the appropriate people. It's being led by Mr. Jim Varghese and 2 other assistant commissioners. But that's their approach. Personally, the officers here weren't part of setting up the review as part of their role, and so probably can't comment directly on the level of consultation. There would have been consultation to some degree as part of that process.
And so what's the government's strategy for dealing with this in the meanwhile, while this review takes a year to come to its conclusion?
We're currently continuing with the compliance strategies at the moment.
So the compliance strategy is not working, though, is it?
No. Well, like I said, we have... The other thing to realise is that transport inspectors have very limited powers. They're not the same as the police. So, again, it's very difficult.
It really seems to me, guys, that we're just sitting on our hands doing nothing for the next year while we review the situation and see whether we want to make Uber legal.
Yeah. Can I take that point?
Certainly.
One point we do want to make, because we've described a lot of the history and up to where we are now, the matters that you're talking about are subject to, because the department is currently investigating the situation of what can we currently do what can we currently do in the meantime until the review comes down and implemented. So what strategies or additional mechanisms, compliance and other forms of strategies can we take, including legal offences and other matters, and that material that the department's putting together will form part of a submission to either or both the Deputy Premier or the whole of government submission.
So you're running your own review?
I wouldn't call it a review. In the meantime, is there anything else we can do under the current regulatory environment to better enforce and ensure compliance with the current environment? And that's subject to advice.
We're really stifled by technology here, aren't we?
We're stifled by, I suppose, the process of change and legislation, regulation within the government, and the speed of the digital transformation that's happening. I think that's the imbalance currently.
So the government can't keep up with technology.
I don't think any government around the world can keep up with technology.
That time we learned how to do it, I think.
What's the average fine if you get caught? What do you get fined?
I'm not
I don't have that figure. I'm sorry.
I can give you a ballpark figure. The two main fines are probably worth $1,600 to $1,800 a pin.
Would it be wise to increase that dramatically to try and send a message out there?
Are there limits on
The issue is about interception, though. Again, it's about
Yeah.
actually.
But if I'm an Uber driver, and I know it's illegal, not in Queensland, I'm carrying out a taxi service. I guess that you've got to have some sort of incentive to keep people. If it, it's illegal in Queensland, we're talking about something that shouldn't happen in Queensland. Am I right?
Everyone's
Yes.
asked all my questions.
So
All over the place.
you've got to deter the people from conducting it.
Yeah. The matters of is there additional offences that can be set up? Are there extra incentives in terms of demerit points? Are the levels of fines sufficient? What extra provisions or legislative changes that we can make to give our transport inspectors maybe some additional supporting powers on the road to help them? Those are matters that are currently being subject to advice that are intended to be put to the government. You're quite right, though.
Just in regards to Uber, like obviously what you're saying here is they can't uphold the law. What are the involvements with the police in this?
the police, the core business for police is criminal activity, so they don't have any jurisdiction or choose not to work in the transport area. That's why we have our own transport inspectors. So, yeah, based on the number of police, the policing requirements of Queensland, it's core activity for them to stay in the criminal realm of maintaining law.
But they do drink driving, speeding, all sorts of traffic infringements that aren't criminal. At what point, what's the difference between transport inspectors' scope and the police's road scope?
You know the difference. It's quite a substantial difference between transport inspector scope and police powers.
I think that the police would have a responsibility for road safety issues, whereas the Uber issues are not necessarily road safety. They're more a regulatory issue for the transport operations.
They get you if you're an unlicensed driver, but they can't get you if you're an unlicensed taxi driver.
Unlicensed driving possibly has a road safety connotation.
Can the panel over there just explain to the committee where is Uber being used, or these ride-sharing services? Is it just based in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, or is it starting to spread? And how long do you think before it's in regional areas like Gladstone, Mackay, all those type of places?
Currently,
or is it there now?
Brisbane and the Gold Coast, predominantly. Their business model tends to be about quantity of demand. They haven't quite looked at any of the other regional areas. I think they're focused, and look, I'm just doing this on my own personal viewpoint and looking at what's happening in the industry. So I think they're looking at they're targeting other capital cities around Australia at the moment. I believe that they have an intention to progress across to major regional centres like Townsville, Cairns, probably Rocky and Toowoomba, but I don't know that that's a very close. I don't think that's in the near future. I think that's probably a longer-term plan because I think the issue is now getting into all these states around around Australia also, because it's an Australian-wide strategy.
Lee, I just want to go back to something here in regards to the regulations that are imposed on the taxi industry. I just want to know, what are the regulations posed on the taxi industry? You mentioned in part there before the cost of licence, I believe, is up to $500,000. And what is the licence for Uber, the cost to them?
I wouldn't have any information about that. A licence value is nothing.
So basically it's nothing. So $500,000 for
I would
a
qualify
taxi
the
licence.
$500,000 as in Brisbane and probably Gold Coast. That's not an accurate figure
For Townsville,
the rest of
Cairns.
Queensland.
So what are the other regulations that are imposed on the taxi industry that they have to comply with?
Yeah, the requirements to have OA, DA, have an approved taxi security camera specification, or sorry, system that's approved with our government specifications. Maximum fees. They can't charge more than what we've prescribed under maximum fees. The life of the vehicles, the conventional vehicles, the sedans have a maximum life of 6 years, of which an accessible taxi has a life of 8 years. They're maximum age limits; they can't go past those ages. CTP insurance for the taxi industry, they class the insurance on purpose of use, so it's a taxi on the road substantially the whole day, so they're a class 3 in terms of CTP insurance, which is
fairly high.
a significant amount of money.
So it's definitely, as you can see, it's no level playing field
Level
here.
playing field.
Can you just explain to us as well, if you know, how does Uber work for us regional people? Like, how do they get paid? How does Uber make money? How does the people who drive these vehicles make money? How does the system work?
They hold drives for drivers. They advertise that they'll be they have set up an area in the middle of the Surfers Paradise, say, and between 9 and 10 or 9 and 3 on a day come and...
Is there any law
come and
against
drive.
that?
No, I've checked with that and got legal advice that that's not illegal.
Okay.
Then the driver sets up, they set up like an account with Uber, and everything then is electronic. They're paid electronically. I think Uber takes 20% of the fare and the rest goes to the driver. I've heard that Uber contribute 20% of tolls, but again, it's a very closed, and it's very difficult for us as government to actually find out a lot of information about how Uber operates. But yeah, it's all electronic. So once you set up as a driver, you've got your driver's account, your bank account details. It all happens without any contact with Uber themselves, basically.
Uber's a worldwide company. This issue is happening everywhere. No point reinventing the wheel. Has anybody in any other state in Australia or anywhere in the world solved this issue yet?
No. ACT, as you heard, have legalised Uber a couple of weeks ago, but their system is quite different. They have annual licences. They don't have perpetual licences that now Capital Growth has raised them to $500,000 for Brisbane taxis. So they've got a very simple
so that
industry.
wouldn't work here
No.
in the sense of that $1.4 billion worth of value in the taxi industry.
Based on the fact that...
What about
yeah.
worldwide?
There's the same situations happening in most areas. I haven't actually heard of one country that's having an easy ride of it unless they've got a very simple framework around their taxi industry, like ACT. A lot of countries did have a simple framework around theirs. Ours is very highly regulated.
Has any country actually just decided that they're illegal and run them out of business?
I think France.
I believe a couple of the communist countries might have done that as well. Could be wrong.
Countries without the strict adherence to the rule of law have been effective in this space, but it's not a good comparison point.
No.
France,
it's not.
Germany and South Korea.
France definitely threw them out.
Just in regards to, obviously, the fines aren't working and there's a challenge and there's an issue relates to the courts. So could you obviously see or support increased demerit points as a means, a way of deter Uber drivers driving illegal taxis, in other words?
Demerit points may be part of the answer, but and we are taking a look at the issue of demerit points, I must admit. But what else can we do with demerit points alone to support compliance powers and maybe other offences and to strengthening the existing legislative regime to take into account this type of operation? What else can we do to actually add to, say, better enforcement on the ground and for our transport inspectors? So it's part of the solution, but that alone will still mean tomorrow you may still have a provider such as Uber, using technology with the sign-on and customer arrangements to make it difficult, or giving certain instructions to their customers to try to avoid the transport inspectors on the road. So those issues will always remain, but it is certainly one of the matters to be considered.
So this is probably a good initiative in some sense, because we've got a review that's taken place that's taking a very, very long time. So would you probably advise the Minister to say, hey, we need to put something into place?
It's not their position.
Yeah, it's not a
Okay.
place, sorry.
We have got some advice, which I foreshadow that we're intending to put up forward. But realistic, I can't say too much more about that than what I have. But
And you're within your rights.
Yes.
The heart of the service is the app, and that's how they have their customer base and they connect with that customer base. It can't, and I mean it's Apple and Android. Isn't there some sort of way? I mean, you couldn't have an app to sell guns or buy drugs. If this is illegal, then is there a way in which the app can be shut down and Apple or, the Android companies contacted about illegal apps?
I was told that was looked into, but that we couldn't, and it falls under a federal jurisdiction too. So as a state, we don't have very many powers to push that. As you know, the ATO is going to offer, charge GST to Uber drivers. So there's a disconnect between the federal and the states. But I can look into that.
Yeah.
I do think I heard that somebody in the past had looked into trying to get it off the app stores and the other stores so that people couldn't download it, but there was an outcome that was negative again for us.
'Cause that's really the artery of the business.
Exactly.
And if you can, cut that artery, you've got no life in that Uber service anymore.
I'll just put that down for something we can look into.
The operator, as I said before, the operator level and whether we can do anything there is one of the matters we're considering. And you're quite right. There are problems in communications field in terms of our more like the jurisdictional but constitutional limitation to act. But what can we do in the operator space to actually look at that level as well as the driver? There is a motivation to go for the driver, but we're exploring that avenue as well. The problem we've had, and what we currently have that we're dealing with, of course, is we've got legislation written in an environment which was a couple of decades ago, and the offences around that largely relate to the operations on the road. Is that a fair comment, Scott?
Yeah. Do you have any information about the insurance side of the risk of driving in an Uber car? Has there been any massive claims for insurance? Have they been able to be accommodated? Do these cars have enough insurance?
There's nothing that I know of that's happened in Queensland. I did read about something overseas and Uber covered all the costs, but I don't know how bad the accident was. If it was, somebody was hurt and, had injuries going on for years, but yeah, I've heard that Uber does cover.
Right. So what's the consequence of someone having an accident in an Uber car and not being covered by insurance? Who pays the bill then?
I don't think we would actually know until that event occurred. It's not something that we can ask for advice on from Uber. They're telling us that their drivers are properly insured.
So we've got to wait and see for that accident to happen before we take any.
There are challenges in terms of vehicles are registered for a certain purpose of use, commercial, private.
Yeah.
There are matters when you cover insurance policy for a vehicle that it's insured and for a certain purpose. I can't run my little car as suddenly a taxi tomorrow. I think my insurance company would be concerned about that. So there's issues of disclosure in the insurance contract, and there's issues of what they're covered for and what they're not, which are realistically commercial and insurance matters.
So these are matters also for the Department of Transport and the registration of the vehicle and the type of insurance they've got, surely.
That's true. I mean, we do have in this state the CTP scheme, of course, that would cover at-fault injury and death type claims. So if there was a fault somewhere, that scheme would kick in. But there's additional matters to do with property and all the rest. But largely, you're right, there are challenges in that it's possible that not all vehicles and operators out there may be properly insured, but that's not a matter that the department's primarily on a commercial insurance front, has had to investigate in depth.
Is there some way we can?
Michael? Yeah, you can answer that question.
The committee's open to investigate it, but the insurance aspect of whether they're covered or not and whether they're sufficient is one point. But I suppose the department in the end is more concerned about safety of the passenger and the regulatory environment, and probably more concerned with the fact that we've got some people providing a demand responsive service that have to have a car that goes for the checks and balances, a driver that goes for checks and balances, has a taxi service contract, service obligations, certain fees and all the rest, and others that don't. That creates an imbalance. That's a main consideration. The safety of passengers is a main consideration. The insurance arrangements is certainly a matter. The department would be right in saying that they should properly investigate those matters, but that could be an area for concern. But I think we're going beyond potentially what the Transport Department may or should do.
Okay, we're just about out of time, but I'd like to ask just one more question, if I may. And sorry I have to read this, but the wording in the proposed legislation, section 70A2, is similar to that in section 75(2) of the Transport Operations or the Road Use Management Driver Licensing Regulation 2010, in that it provides that the Chief Executive may record certain things, including the demerit points on the person's traffic history. Why is there discretion to do so? For example, why is the word may used rather than must in section 75? It's always tricky in legislation.
Yeah.
May.
Yeah, no, it is. Demerit points are set out, I believe, because this is a you're reading from an act, and I believe that the Transport Operations Driver Licensing Regulation has a schedule to that regulation which sets out the demerit points applying. So what that may is that effectively gives the Chief Executive the ability to attach demerit points. I believe that's done through regulation at that stage. Yeah, may record a person's traffic history, particular as the offence. There may also be circumstances where it may be inappropriate to attach demerit points because of exceptional circumstances, which is why it maybe have been written.
Yeah, well, we can pursue that more. I just thought you might have an answer for us. Look, unfortunately, because I noticed a couple of the members were getting pretty excited about having the opportunity to talk to you, so I dare say we'll have you back.
Sure.
Okay.
But time has expired.
Just got a burning question.
You've got a burning question?
No, it's too late now. I'm sorry.
Burnt out.
There being no further questions, we'll thank you for being here. And like I say, we'll be talking again. And time has expired, and I now call the member for Mount Isa.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that's all right. I've just got my sister Kirsten and Ben Walsh from the Taxi Council with me here. Do I need to seek leave for that?
Yeah, we'll have to check with the committee with regard. So you all happy?
Yeah, absolutely.
All happy?
Yeah.
Approved. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. you want me to fire away, or do you want to wait for that name tag?
No, I just want to make a couple of comments first, Rob.
Do you want us to call you Mr. Catter or Robbie?
Robbie's fine. Member for Burleigh.
Well, you're wearing that vest. It might be Mr. Catamount with that vest.
I don't know. I need everybody to give their names and their position.
Okay.
At the top table.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks very much for giving me the opportunity, Chair and members of the committee. It's good to be back as part of the committee. I have Kirsten Payne from my office here to assist me, and Benjamin Wash from the Taxi Council as well to help me give meaningful answers to the committee on any questions that you have.
Okay, fair enough.
And I seek leave to have the...
Yeah, well, we've committees
done that
okay
already?
now.
Yeah, sorry.
Not a problem. We're like that. We try to get on well with it.
Pull that microphone over, Ben.
Well, Mr. Catter, would you like to make an opening statement?
Yeah, I would. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And first, before I start, I'd just like to say that the quality of those questions I think were very pertinent, and I think really hit the money and did a lot of my job for me. But I think there's two arguments here with this proposed amendments that we have here. There's two arguments that the first point to make is that will we uphold the laws of our government that we put in place? That's the first point to make, which was made very succinctly earlier. The second point is how do we deal with what the law should be, which is a philosophical argument which really refers to that review. This bill is intended to address the existing laws that are in place, and a lot of effort has gone in time through this place, through the Taxi Council, through consultation with the industry, to develop those laws for very specific reasons, and we'd like to address that. It is clear that the existing penalty regime of fines no longer acts as a disincentive to modify behaviour or discourage illegal activities. The Deputy Premier, Minister for Transport, has stated, and I quote, "It is not a grey area at all in Queensland. In order to run a taxi, you need a taxi licence. No one who operates an Uber car has a taxi licence." The effectiveness of fining vehicles operating using the Uber platform is clearly not working, as we've heard earlier. This again was evidenced by the comment made by the Deputy Premier when she said, "This is not stopping Uber." Let's be clear, this is not stopping Uber. So we're failing in our attempts at the moment to stop Uber, so we need to investigate ways to stop an illegal activity that we've identified. And then this point was made earlier, and I think it's a really pertinent point, and the activity of this business, the way they've gone about this operation really offends me, and I hope it offends other people, the way they've gone about developing their business and entering the market. But it came to my attention that transport officers trying to do their job, trying to uphold the laws that we make in this place, they've blocked their cell phones, as we heard earlier. So I've had that confirmed. They've blocked their cell phones, so they've stopped law enforcement officers doing their job of trying to uphold the law for what they know they're breaking. Now, I find that offensive, and I think we as lawmakers should find that offensive. And that cuts to the heart of why we need to do something and why we're attempting to do something with these amendments. And I just want to labour that point because I think there's a much bigger principle at play here than just taxis. Are we going to allow a multinational company come into our country, come into our state, acknowledge that there is a set of laws, consciously disobey those laws, and confirming that by we're going to pay $1.5 million in fines, and then they're going to recommend to the government that you can change the laws to suit our business model, but we'll keep operating in the meantime. And I think a pertinent point that's made is that the criminal code in Queensland was written pre-1900 in the 1890s. Now, if we were going to do a review of that criminal code next year, does that mean we just disregard all criminal activity up until that review's done? We need to act now. And you know, if anyone thinks we don't need to act now, let's just wait for the review. Well, we've had violence in the streets, which I don't condone as a terrible thing, but you've got violent activities relating to this issue. I think suggests that something needs to be done immediately to address this issue. And that's not to mention the livelihoods of some 11,000 drivers that we've got out there, small businesses that have built a business around the security of having that regulation, the same as a pharmacy owner does, same as a hotel owner does. They build a business around that, having the security that government upholds the law and will stop people selling from grog out of their house or selling pharmaceuticals from a news agency. They put the laws there in a place, and you invest in that knowing that government looks after you. But now, and we just heard there an example before from the department that this is too hard and we just can't deal with it. So that's not sending a very good signal to all the rest of the businesses that operated under a regulated environment in Queensland. I think there's a lot more to just taxi licences and taxi issues here. Like I said, there's a philosophical debate of whether they should be allowed to operate in the market. Park that aside. There's a much bigger principle at play here, and I think it's really important for the government of Queensland to send a message to businesses and people in general that you don't come into our state, disregard our laws, and then tell us how to change the laws to suit your business model. I find that offensive. Passenger safety is paramount and is crucial to this part of the argument. And we've had some comments that the Premier said there should be a national approach to the issue, which would make things very difficult because, as we heard, it was alluded to earlier, but the industry is very different in places like the ACT. The previous Premier said that the previous government wasn't a regulation-minded government and won't be regulating Uber. So there hasn't been a huge appetite to date to deal with this issue, but I think the recent events have the way that the problem has increased so fast that now it's come to a point that we need to act. It would appear that existing penalties are not doing the job. I think the member for Gregory pointed out earlier, and I think the member for Dalrymple will mention the police involvement. I think that's a crucial issue, and I'm dissatisfied with the response when it said that police can't detect it or they can't go and just impose themselves on people suspecting that it's an unlicensed activity. Well, that happens all the time in the course of police activities. There is a big role for police to play in this as well, and they can't deny their role in enforcing the law the laws that we make here. If we make a law or legislate a law here in Parliament, it's expected that the police or TMR will uphold those laws. Otherwise, what's the point of us making any laws here? And do we need any bigger wake-up call and the tension that this is causing? And I think coming back to the issue of businesses, there's some key points I think to make in terms of what the regulations have delivered to Queensland. There's 1 million wheelchair-bound passenger lifts made a year in Queensland. Now, I know that the unlicensed taxi service that's operating out there at the moment, it has a wheelchair. I think it's called Uber Assist. But the key point is that's not mandated. 25% of the taxi service has to be wheelchair-bound compliant. They're made to do that. They're not paid any extra. They have to cross-subsidise that with their regular fares on other taxis. And what's more, there's just things. There's specific things that the taxi industry's delivered and developed over the years. Say, for instance, if a wheelchair-bound, a wheelchair access taxi service is in the Enoggera area of Brisbane, and they get called to the other side of Brisbane, there's intelligence in the booking system that says, well, we'll try and find something else. Even if it takes a little bit longer, we'll get another service because we prefer to keep that wheelchair taxi over this side of Brisbane just in case there's an old person needs to get it, or there's that sort of intelligence and sophistication in the systems of the existing regulated system that improves service, and that we enjoy the benefit of that service now because it's been regulated. Now, you deregulated it, and I must congratulate the Uber service for a wonderful public publicity campaign. Free ice creams up in Townsville, and it would appear to me that the young people love it, and that it's new, it's fresh, and they're, in my opinion, they're using that public opinion and trying to control put pressure on us as lawmakers by influencing that area of the public. And an interesting point to make there is that I think the carrot at the moment is the low fares, which they can obviously achieve by having a deregulated market where they don't have the security cameras, they don't incur the $30,000 to $35,000 a year of operating costs that ensure that sort of safety regulation, the 24-hour security, rolling security checks, your security cameras, those sort of things. They don't need all that, so of course they're going to compete on price. But the taxi industry can't survive that sort of competition for too long. So you see a collapse in the taxi industry, what's to stop? There's no regulated fare, there's no ceiling, which there is at the moment. There's a ceiling on the fare price, so you'll lose that ability, and the whole purpose for the thing in the first place moves in that deregulated environment where you've got no control over that. And things like the 24-hour service commitment that you have from a regulated taxi industry, you won't get from this sort of service. So there are some important factors. And sorry, the last one is the taxation revenue is $90 million a year in Commonwealth revenue. That's nationally is GST revenue from the taxi service. Now, you put a hole in that, which undoubtedly you will if this is not fixed, this problem. We're going to have to find those taxes from someone else. So, and that's because they're a multinational company. The fares paid overseas, they avoid paying the tax, and I find that offensive as well. If they want to do business here, they've got to pay tax like the rest of us. So they're the key points that I'd like to make, and there's certainly a lot more on the issue I'd like to say, but I'd be happy to take questions from here, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. First question, Rob, is did you consider other options for addressing the issue of illegal taxi services? And if you did, what made you decide to choose the recording of demerit points?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was a number of, obviously, this has been thought about a lot by people in the industry and ourselves, and this was seen as probably the most discreet or less intrusive way that would be, I guess, publicly palatable and but still effective. And if you're a if you're a taxi driver at the moment and you get a fine, I think the increase in fines didn't work in France, was it? France or
Germany? Well,
all through Europe.
Well, they increased the fine. They tried that approach. It didn't work. And this is not a silver bullet. This by no means fixes the situation, but it goes some way into saying, well, try driving without your licence. If you've got you've deliberately broken the law, you know you're doing it. You not only pay the fine, but will take your right to drive off you if you can persist in breaking the law. So the three points for the first offence and the 6 points for the second offence, it mirrors what the government already acknowledged with the mobile phones in the cars, which is saying, which I don't know how you class that as a minor, moderate, half traffic offence, but I think it marries up pretty well with that offence. And if we're willing to fine people for talking on mobile phones, we should be willing to at least demerit points on mobile phones. We should at least be saying to someone that's willingly drivingly unlicensed, 3 to 6 months, I think, is at the bare minimum of what we should be offering, but at least does give our lawmakers some way of stopping them.
Michael.
Robbie, very succinct argument. I think you've just reinforced a lot of things that I was thinking myself. Can I ask you if you've ever used Uber yourself?
Yes, I have. Remember earlier, I took a ride purely for education purposes. The interesting personal opinion, some people would argue with me on this, but might be considered a biased opinion, but I did feel I had a sense of my safety was compromised, particularly if I put myself in the eyes of a female being driven out the back of Oxley at night because I couldn't read a rego number, or there's no security camera there. It just didn't have that sense of formality. I was just in someone's car getting a lift, and that was my personal feeling. But I'd probably only, respond to that in the sense that I felt the responsibility to do the research, look at what Uber's saying, read their reports, and that was just an education process.
Do you think that Uber has any place in the taxi-related industry at all?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're willing to adopt the prescribed regulatory activities that are under the law, good to see it, welcome competition into the market.
Okay, so the review that the government's got in place that's going to take a year to come to fruition, are you happy about that timing?
No, well, not in relation to this Uber issue. Like I said, we've got violent activities on the streets now. That's a pretty clear sign we need action now.
Okay. You've heard from the department that they're having trouble actually catching these guys. So while I think your idea is good, demerit points, how's that going to work if we can't catch them?
Well, that's a good point, but it's not a reason not to enforce the demerit points in the terms of this proposed amendment. I think beyond the scope of this bill, we should be asking questions of the department. Why aren't they going harder on people who are breaking the laws of this state?
Yeah. So there were some other ideas that sort of came out there. I assume you were listening to those and picking up on some of those, so you might have some amendment ideas.
Absolutely, scope for obviously we have an issue. Our party has an issue with the principle of this matter, and we're trying to address that. So we'd love to add value to these amendments and this effort with any other proposed amendments.
Brittany?
Yeah, am I allowed to ask questions of Benjamin as well?
If you ask me, I'll put it through to Ben.
Okay, sure. I was just curious about what you think is the reason that Uber has been a successful service, and if there's particular elements of their service that people prefer over, apart from obviously the cheap, it being cheaper. If there's other things that people are interested in using Uber as opposed to a taxi for.
Benjamin, would you like to answer that?
Sure.
Fair enough.
Look, I guess the first point that I'll make is, other than statements made by Uber in the media through their vast media machine internationally, there is no evidence that it is overwhelmingly popular or people are voting with their feet, which is disappointing when that's the glib lines that are picked up and trotted out by the media and some other politicians. We're still carrying 250,000 people a day, each and every single day. And if their figures are to be believed, they're carrying maybe 1,000, if it truly is that popular. Now, there has been some feedback around being able to rate a driver and for drivers being able to rate customers. My concern in a regulated environment, or Taxi Council's concern in a regulated environment, is we have a rule of law in Australia that also protects workers' rights, and you shouldn't be able to be turfed on the side of the road for a bad rating, which could be based on someone having a bad day. There's got to be an element of natural justice, and that natural justice is currently carried out through the disciplinary measures and bylaws of existing booking companies that operate under service contracts to the Queensland Government, and those booking companies are responsible to report on a quarterly basis minimum to the Government and be responsible for those activities. So someone doing the wrong thing based on a judgment and a star rating needs to be investigated, because this is someone's livelihood. But we certainly support disciplinary measures. In terms of someone being able to rate a customer, that's problematic. And it's problematic from the point of view that everyone should have free and equal access to all manner of transport, and whether the government or the department is prepared to acknowledge it in a public way, the pure existence of the service contracts makes us, by definition, part of the public transport system, filling the gaps that trains and buses can't actually fill in terms of the point-to-point. And to be able to exclude someone because they might have had a few too many drinks, that, if their activities are unlawful, then the police can deal with that matter, but it doesn't mean that they should be blocked out of a system for all future potential transports, and that's the concern. So while the public see these as redeeming features, we actually understand that there's problems with them. The industry has been working since long before Uber came to town to put in place technological methods for people to be able to track cars. SMS on approach has been around for 4 or 5 years, even before apps became so widely popular. So I think the perception of what's popular and the perception of the new delivery is more a function of what the media have been prepared to actually promote than fact.
Mm-hmm. But the Taxi Council is constantly looking at service improvements?
Always. And if you go back over the track record of the last 25 years, the Queensland taxi industry is indeed a world leader. Where many parts of the world still don't have GPS recording and tracking, we've had it for 25 years. We were the first industry to have fleet-wide cameras, fleet-wide FPOS. A lot of places in the world you still can't get that. So in markets like in the United States, where that isn't widely available, which I might add is a deregulated market and has been for 50 years, Uber's revolutionary. In Queensland, where we've had such good evolution of technology over such a long period of time, it's actually regressive. Some of the things that are seen as redeeming is old news for us. It's and to move away from the established systems that are proven to work isn't taking us forward. In fact, it's taking us backwards.
Robbie, through you, if I could, what's the impact this is going to have on regional towns? I come from the seat of Gregory. I've got the Hoopers in Emerald, and I've got the Tanks in Longreach. Good, hard-working family operators, reliable. They do a lot of work with disabilities and aged care. Is there a sense of impact that this could have on regional towns across Queensland if Uber could come in? It's deregulated. It depends on the time of day if they want to do it or not do it, and we don't have a taxi industry in those small regional towns, which provide not only a service to everyday people, but a community service which is well regarded.
If you don't mind. The first point I want to make here is, while there's an awful lot of talk about Uber, it's got to be qualified. Illegal taxi services have always existed in Queensland, and they've been much more prevalent in regional and rural towns, and it's something that has been difficult for us to address as the peak body over a period of decades, because they operate in the shadows. Where Uber becomes a game changer is that they're actually now legitimising on a wholesale basis black market activity effectively. So the impact in regional areas has always been felt. The impact of this bill on regional areas would be to empower enforcement officers and potentially the police through amendments associated with the bill in those country areas to actually crack down on illegal activity. So even if Uber may not come into those towns, it may be that you've got someone who turns up at the races on race day in Cunnamulla and they pick someone up and they take them and they do a cash transaction. Whether there's a piece of technology there or not, it is an illegal taxi service because there is someone operating in that space who can rightfully assume that they're doing all of the right things and someone shouldn't be able to just come in and operate in a bootleg manner. So it does have a big impact in that sense.
Would you say it'd have a bigger impact given that every fare in regional Queensland, those small country towns, means something? As in, we don't have, down here in Brisbane you have such a large customer base in regional Queensland. I mean, they might only get 5 fares for the day or 4 fares for the day.
I think it's absolutely fair to say that the wide-ranging impact of this bill amending demerit points on legal taxi services is actually going to benefit rural and regional Queensland much more prominently than it will in the city areas. What it does is it actually says we recognise the work that you do and the space in which you operate and the investment that you make, the contribution that you make, and we're not prepared to withstand someone coming in and simply saying the rules don't mean anything because it doesn't suit our business model.
And just one last question, I suppose it's directed back to Robbie. Have you got any feedback from government on your proposal, from the departmental people on how this would work and is it feasible?
No, I haven't. I'd probably respond to that saying it's pretty simple. It's not a really complex amendment. It's just demerit points on an existing law that's there, and I took with great interest what the department response was today, and I think that confirmed that really nothing's happening. Nothing's going to happen until August next year at best, unless something's done in the short term. And I think, we mentioned the violent activity, the business risk, that the values of, the average value of a metropolitan licence, I think, was $511,000, and I think the figures being released now, but there's already substantial drop. You've got people going to have their loan-to-value ratio smashed and houses sold up, and we've already got that economic impact happening now, so the damage is already being done, and the industry's on very wobbly wheels already. And another interesting point is you've created a culture now in an industry where people can see you can flout the law. So there's even there's evidence now of people who are just not even under the Uber banner, lining up at taking hail and ride things because, well, government's not cracking down on this, so it's a free for all, fellas. Let's all have a go. And you're creating that sort of culture there, which I think screams out that something needs to be done in the short term.
Mr. Cutter, just very quickly, in regard to the criminal code, what was talked about before, I probably should have asked the department this question, but if the Uber drivers are encouraging people to use Uber service, does that mean that they're breaking the criminal code?
I'll put that over to Ben.
Look, the legal advice that we received is under Section 12 of the Criminal Code, which deals with party provisions, it's illegal to induce someone to engage in an activity that is unlawful. And so from that point of view, the marketing campaigns that are being undertaken and the inducements that are being given in terms of vouchers for people to come and use an unlawful service are, based on the legal advice we've received, criminal activities.
Okay, so I just want to make that clear. So that's more or less encouraging people to commit.
To break the law.
To break the law.
And that's exactly right. And to that extent, we have referred the information we have, and we've placed a submission with the Queensland Organised Crime Commission of Inquiry.
Can I just make...
Catch and break in the law.
Yeah, just one comment through Robbie to Benjamin as well. Is the Taxi Council actually doing anything with the drivers that they currently have to make things better? I've never been in so many taxis in my life since becoming a member here, particularly in Brisbane. And to say the least, some of my experiences in some of these taxis, I have feared for my life a couple of times with a few drivers. So is there anything that the Taxi Council is doing to make sure the experience of when a person gets in a taxi, particularly in a big city, is worthwhile? I've got in taxis where the driver didn't know where the domestic airport was. I've got in taxis where the driver nearly fell asleep and I had to shake him on the shoulder. Is the council doing anything to make the experience better in cities like this? Because the first thing that I think of once I go through that experience is, what's better than this? Is there something else? And if there's Uber there, well, that's the next port of call, because the experience that the taxis are giving people aren't acceptable. Sorry, it's a long-winded question, but
that's okay. Look, Taxi Council has always worked with its members on continually improving customer service. And yes, there's additional training that goes in, there's update training. All of the fleets right throughout the state, all of the booking companies run fleet inspectors, and they try to catch out people who are falling below the line. And we take it very seriously. When someone has a bad experience, there's very few industries who deliver the same volume of service that we do as an industry who will react to one bad experience, but we do. Part of it, however, is if someone does have a bad experience, as we've often said, it needs to be reported. And, you know, while we will address each and every single instance of someone failing to deliver, we can't solve mysteries, so we need to know about it. If there's other ways of people being able to report that, then it's certainly something that I know our members are looking at, continually updating ways for the public to be able to give that feedback back. Having said that, while it's unfortunate that any one individual can have bad experiences, we know that for every 10,000 trips we take, on average, there's only one person who's having a bad experience. But that one person is always motivated to tell someone about that experience. and it's unprecedented because we're such a visible frontline service. If you have a bad experience in a coffee shop, you just go to a different coffee shop. And it's like any customer service-based industry. If it meets or exceeds your expectations, by the time you've stepped out of the cab, you've forgotten the experience. If it falls below your expectations, it scars you, and you're motivated to actually talk about it. It's one of the unique challenges that we have as an industry, but I can assure you that Taxi Council, through its membership, continually is working on ways to improve it. And certainly over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been the CEO of the Taxi Council, there's a clear public commentary about us seeking to do that, and we will continue to.
Good answer.
I think it was Brittany asked a question earlier about the Taxi Council not wanting this to move for 2 years, whereas Rob and other people have suggested we should get on with it. Why would you say 2 years? Why would you want 2 years?
Well, I think there needs to be a point of clarification. Firstly, there's 2 issues on the table. One is the philosophical structure of the industry and whether there is a place for things like ride sharing, which we argue is a taxi by any other name, and what the regulatory framework is as part of a review. Now, for the past 50 years, every 5 to 7 years, there's been a substantial body of work and a review of this nature. That's one issue. It shouldn't be allowed that the current breaches of law are wrapped up into that issue. As Robbie said before, if you chose to review the criminal code, you wouldn't cease policing, enforcement and prosecution of crimes defined by that code until such time as you come up with a new code. Equally, if you were revising something on a wholesale basis, such as the terms of reference of the current review, I don't think it's appropriate to try and punch through, for the sake of expediency or media pressure, a new way of regulating things in just 10 months. We were asking for 2 years because we want deep policy thinking. We don't want Twitter policy thinking, as we've seen at state and federal levels in the past, over the past decade. So we want to make sure that whatever review is taken, and no one's more invested than the taxi industry ensuring that we get the right outcomes from the Queensland community, that's a different issue to enforcing the current law. We absolutely believe that the government should have taken action when they issued the first cease and desist, so we're not even having this discussion now. It's too late, and it needs to happen as soon as we can. And if TMR officers are finding it difficult, we have a police force. If someone was running a bootleg liquor or illegal hotel premises without a liquor licence, I know for a fact that there is a section of the police force that will go in and shut them down. If TMR are finding that they are overwhelmed by this issue currently because it is outside the scope of what they've had to deal with in the past, which is a compliant industry, and often we identify our own who are making breaches and refer them to compliance, to someone who on a wholesale basis, because of their sheer size on an international or global scale, is saying, well, you know, laws are now what we define them to be, and paying fines is an operational cost. That's inappropriate. That needs to be dealt with, and it should not be subsumed into any kind of review. There needs to be a clear distinction between one activity and one review philosophically and what is happening on the ground. The laws need to be upheld right now.
So what you're saying is you normally go through a 2-year review process?
Every 5 to 7 years.
Every 5 to 7 years, and the next one's not due for another 2 years. Is
well,
that what
no,
you're saying?
The last review dictated that the strategy would end in 2015, so it set a 5-year period. So this review, make no mistake, this review was going to occur
yes, exactly.
regardless of whether Uber came to Queensland or not.
So what approaches have you made to government with regard to getting on with the job now? In this particular case, because legislation needs to be reviewed or whatever?
On the 5th of September, there was an incident on the Gold Coast where a 21-year-old girl was run over by an Uber vehicle after being physically dragged out of that vehicle. It was a horrendous experience. The very next day, we wrote to the Deputy Premier, the Director General, and we wrote to Director General of Transport and Main Roads and the Police Commissioner, saying that we were aware, in discussions I'd had with the Deputy Premier face-to-face that weekend before, she confirmed that no enforcement activity had continued since June because it had become difficult. But no leave had been sought in terms of bringing the police in. An incident occurred, we wrote to them, and we said we're aware and have had it confirmed that enforcement activity has ceased. What is your plan to do it? To date, I haven't received a letter back from the Deputy Premier's office we've had no response from the Deputy Premier's office. And as far as the Department of Transport and Main Roads, we're waiting on a response, and the Police Commissioner has referred the matter to the Department of Transport and Main Roads.
Did he refer the matter to the Department of Transport and Main Roads because it's outside of the scope of his power?
He didn't actually state anything about the scope of his power, and we have written to him since, actually articulating the specific provisions of the Police Powers and Responsibilities Act for which he is sworn in office to actually uphold, where under the current legislation every police officer in the state of Queensland is an authorised officer to enforce anything in terms of taxi regulation. And indeed, the police are often the ones who fine taxi drivers for picking up and dropping off in clearways at the wrong time, picking up and dropping off on yellow lines, too close to an intersection, all of the things that are safety-based. And so they already take an active participant role in that. I believe that the inaction in this is driven largely by political inertia as opposed to powers under the department.
Robbie, should it be up to the Taxi Council to write to the government to ask them to enforce current laws?
No, absolutely not. I think, that's the short answer. It's interesting that, an issue of, like, in addressing that question, the issue of safety has come up that, is this a safety issue? It's interesting that the department's response before was that, there's no safety issue with this, that's why we're not, I can't paraphrase, but that was sort of the nature of the answer, the response. But there's actually are some big safety issues of this which should trigger some sort of response or play some role in government's response, because, you've got things in the regulation like your fatigue management that deal with fatigue management, congestion, designated pickup points that impact on traffic flow. So there are safety issues associated with this that, should plays a part in this sort of this response thing. But yeah, I definitely think there should be a response. That's why we're here.
Given that it's an illegal service,
yep.
If there's a car crash and somebody's seriously injured, they're not covered under any insurance scheme in Australia, are they? Uber might pay that out eventually when there's a decision made.
Yep.
But really, people are running at risk by travelling in a vehicle.
I think there's not a short. I'm probably not the best. I know that there's sort of Class 3 insurance, Class 1 that Uber operate. I might get you to answer that one, actually.
Sure. Look, in late last year, the Insurance Council of Australia, on behalf of their members, clearly stated that that's exactly what the issue is. It's a commercial service. It doesn't matter. No amount of spin or social media or political pressuring is going to make it less of a commercial service. If you've got a car offering someone a ride and they're paying for that ride, it's a commercial service. And there's no insurance company currently that will cover that. NRMA has said that if the person's doing a very small amount of work, then they may cover it under their current comprehensive. But should we be waiting for an accident to occur and then have the insurer simply go, well, actually it was a commercial activity and someone suffers loss or even loss of life, I don't think it's acceptable when we can reasonably foresee what the outcome is, that action's not being taken.
Okie doke. Well, thank you very much.
Just one more question, and the member for Gregory in part put this question to you, Benjamin, but I'm obviously from a rural area, and likewise Robbie is, and a lot of the issues are happening down here, and there's no Uber service out there at this present, or in part no Uber service. Just a question to Mr. Carter is, have the taxi industry out there at Mount Isa spoken to you, and is there concerns brought to your attention by them?
Before anyone else, taxi drivers in Mount Isa raised it with me and said, you've got to do something about it.
And what was their main concern?
Oh, they've got an investment in the industry. They made an investment buying that business, and they see, and probably a lot of it's on a matter of principle too, whether it gets to Mount Isa or not. They've said publicly in my local paper that they want to get to Mount Isa. Uber wants to expand there, but whether they get there or not, I think on a matter of principle, they see someone attacking their industry and bypassing laws they've got to work under, so they're offended by that, and they were incensed, and I had a number of taxi drivers come to my office on that. So.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I've got to jump in, but time has expired. There's been a commitment to get some. That was good. Yeah, the department gave us a commitment to get some documentation back to us. Can that happen by this Friday? Oh, okay. 30th of October. Is that okay? Somebody might get some overtime out of it, eh? Yeah, there been. I want to thank everybody today for turning up. It's been quite interesting for us. I think we've got quite a few areas where we need to investigate, quite deeply get into this. So thanks again, and
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
we'll probably run off again sometime before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Shirt front, you